Hello everybody, my name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author and robot, and today we're doing a book review. I don't have the usual book backer, but I will pop the book up here on the screen when we get to that point. But before we get started, a couple of things. Number one, check out the Lemoy down in the comments below, well, the description below, if you would like to be featured on this channel in next month's Lemoy special edition 1 year anniversary of doing Lemoy here. Yeah, and you know, if I wasn't on my laptop, there would be confetti here, but I don't have any of the special effects on my computer, but the stock ones that come with the program. So, the other thing is, if you are creative and you would like your work featured on this channel, at the end of the month, I will be doing the second annual, whatever it would be called, pitch fit, where you pitch me your stories on the forum, and then I will pitch them to the audience here, and maybe readers and writers or creatives will find new audiences. Finally, if you enjoy what I do here on the channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Friday, we will be doing the very first Battle of the Bulge here on Loinstream. Instead of reading a normal book like we usually do, typically indie books, we're actually going to be taking the first chapters from Loinstreamers and reading Loinstreamer first chapters, responding to them, giving first impressions on different works. So I'm so excited to see what Loinstreamers have created to share, and oh my goodness, I almost knocked that box over, but oh my goodness, I'm ready. With all of that said, let's get into the book review. Mystic Passage by C.L. Carhart. It is book 2 of the His Name Was Augustine series. I think it's a 5-book series. I would like to preface this by saying I haven't read the first book, so what I'm going to be saying on this one is pretty much contained to what I read in this book alone and does not include the first book. The information I have about the first book is from reviews and chapter summaries that I've read from various places from other people reading the book. And I will be reading book 1 of the His Name Is Augustine series in the near future. I was buddy reading this with some people, so I wanted to review it before it got so far out of my head that I completely forgot everything I wanted to say. Anyway, I found this book because I mistakenly belonged to an alternative social media site that's not Twitter. At this point, I don't really know how much it's worth to be on alternate social media sites, or social media sites in period, or social media sites in general because of the drama, but I like reading books. I like talking about books. I like dissecting plots. I like doctoring plots. You can see that in all of the book reviews that I do on this channel mostly. I don't do all of them. Particularly, I don't really doctor plots of books that I enjoy. But with the drama on that website, the only reason I'm there is because I met the OG Loinstreamers there, and they are some of the greatest people that I have met, that I'm not just going to ditch that chat room. Anyway, I found the His Name Was Augustine series via Minds. It's a series by indie author C.L. Carhart. This is her second book published, as well as the second book in this series. She started publishing the series earlier this year, and the third book of the series is actually coming out on Friday, so you can get a 3-fer if you would like to check out this book yourself. I hear there's a lot of sex and rape in it, if that's what you're into. And I'll probably review that one after book 1, just because it's what I do when I'm already this invested, right? I read the Fighting Storm series. I can probably do this. Now, obviously, I heard of this series a couple months ago when the first book was published, or just before the first book was published, but I took a little longer to actually read the series or get into any of the books because of 2 main reasons. Number 1 is that I'm definitely not the target audience for this book, so I took that into consideration on whether I would read it or not. Like I said in my tropes and genres video, I'm not the biggest fan of fantasy or time travel, and then the cover of this book makes me think YA fantasy. The writing of it also makes me think YA fantasy, but we'll get into the writing of it a little bit later. I also read the first couple of chapters in the first book back when that came out, and I went, I'm not drawn in. But the buddy read of this book got me, and so now here we are. Since this is the second book in the series, let me also preface this by saying this book is about people called the Teutons, who can use elemental magic. In book 1, the main character, Swanie, found a stone that allows her to travel through time. At the end of that book, she has set up a portal to go back in time to the rise and fall of the Teuton civilization because she wants to see how the end of her people happened. That's pretty much all you need to know in the preface to set up this book, hopefully. Maybe I'll be making a note in the video for the first book later when I read it to go, oh, okay, and this and this and this. But for now, as always, if this book interests you for any reason, I highly encourage you to pick it up, read it, and form your own opinions about it. Come back and talk, because my favorite thing in general is talking and sharing ideas and all of the different things that come with talking about books. So, before we can get into the response that I had to this book, I have to give you the synopsis. Mystic Passage opens with a prologue where Swanie is finishing writing the first book in the series. The premise here is that she's writing an autobiography of her life and the history of her people, the Teutons, so that her son can know the truth of what happened to them when he gets older. Augustine, her love interest, walks in and comments on the writing being more like a novel than a history book. After a brief back and forth, Augustine compliments Swanie on how good her writing is and then leaves her to work on the next volume of her life. The actual novel starts with Swanie, her cousin Beth, and her cousin's boyfriend Joel going through a time portal and arriving in 1064 Germany. They're in the middle of the woods. Swanie's trying to get her bearings about her, and by the way, Beth and Swanie knew that they were going back in time, but neither of them actually told Joel anything about what they were doing or that magic existed. He's just kind of a normie. So they dragged him kind of into the middle of the woods wherever they were and gave him the preface of, think of old-timey Germany, really, really hard. And that's about it, and that's what opened the portal. So obviously, because he has no idea of what's going on, Joel thinks that he's dreaming, when suddenly they're in the woods in the middle of nowhere, dressed like they're going to a Ren fair. Shortly after arriving, the group is attacked by a random gang of Romanis. Beth is nearly immediately stabbed to death and dies. Now, fortunately, the rules of time travel are very forgiving in this universe. If you die in the past, you just return to your normal life where you left off, and no worse for the wear, like resetting a video game character. So Beth is fine. She's just not with Joel and Swanie anymore. Joel's doing his best to fight off the attackers, but killing one of them before Swanie and Joel flee the scene. Swanie uses her elemental ice magic to carry her and Joel downstream and away from the attackers. During the escape, she drops the time travel stone without realizing it. Obviously, Swanie has some explaining to do after manipulating ice, teleporting them through time, and basically making them fly. She gives a brief description to Joel of she gives a brief description to Joel about what being a Teuton means, and he quickly just kind of accepts it. Once Swanie and Joel escape their attackers, they run into an escaped slave woman named Freya. She had been captured by the Romani people for years and used as a sex slave. Swanie invites the woman to travel with them for safety reasons. And because Swanie wants to be best friends in this new time period with this woman, since, Beth is gone, she claims that she's going to be best friends with Freya. And spoiler alert, she gets what she wants. It happens. You name it, she gets it. The three of them travel through the woods until they happen upon Munich. The goal here is to look for Prince Otto to learn the secrets of the time travel melody, because Prince Otto was the one who crafted the time travel stone. Swanie explains how they need the song because they're stuck in the Middle Ages unless they get that song, since the stone is lost. But at the same time as Swanie is saying this, Joel is asking, so we're stuck here unless we die, right? Technically, yes. But also, you're not really trapped there. But for the sake of the plot, we have to pretend that they are trapped there. At Munich, the society is tiered between the Teutons and the non-Teutons. Teutons are the golden tier citizens with special privileges and considered better people than the non-Teutons. This is so important to the society that after Joel, Freya, and Swanie are accepted as visitors, they must have their blood tested to see the purity levels so that the society knows how to treat them, and really, if any of them belong there at all. Since Swanie is 95% blood pure Teuton, then she is more than enough Teuton to be accepted among the civilization, while the others are there as her non-Teuton guests. One day, Joel experiences an execution in the town square. He comes back to Swanie to tell her how frightening the view was. Swanie goes to Prince Otto, the man who runs Munich, and tells him about her time travels. She tells him that she knows about the Song of Time Traveling, and she wishes that he would teach it to her. He declines, probably the smartest move. Otto also lectures Swanie about using her Teutonic ice powers to fight off the attackers earlier in the book, because the attackers might think that she's a witch, and then everybody's going to get in trouble. The irony later when people are calling Swanie, these same people are calling Swanie a witch, that is Otto and them, because of the blood magic, but I digress there. Things aren't really off to a great start in this new life. This is also when Swanie learns that she's made kind of a big mistake in the time travel business area. She meant to arrive in 1064, 2 years before the fall of the Teutonic people. She came back in time specifically to see society fall, like morbid vacationing. However, because she didn't inform Joel of what exactly they were doing, his vague thinking brought them back to 1044 instead of 1064, 20 years too early. Without the stone or the ability to time travel beyond killing herself to go back to the current year, Swanie is stuck living 2 decades in the Middle Ages if she can't get to the time travel abilities back. She opts on sticking it out in 1044 because she really, really, really wants to see the fall of her people and sees no other option without the time travel stone in hand. From here, Swanie tells Joel, yeah, we are kind of stuck here. Yeah, get ready for life to suck because we have no family, no money, or anything, and, well, you're not a Teuton, so life's gonna kind of suck for you, Joel. Sorry. Swanie, Joel, and Freya pretty much settle into society in Munich for a while. Joel finds a job, Swanie sort of hangs out, makes clothing sometimes, and life goes on. One day, there's a party going on called the Primary Celebration. Swanie and Freya are invited to attend specifically to meet young lords and bachelors. It's here that Swanie first lays her eyes on Augustine. Just hanging out and playing games with the boys, as you do. Swanie's immediately drawn to him. When she asks who he is, she's told no decent woman wants anything to do with him. He's the executioner of the city, after all. Swanie's like, brah. How is that gorgeous thing over there, like, painting the streets with blood? Are you serious? Doesn't even matter. Swanie's still super into that. Augustine is also introduced as Prince Otto's older brother. Swanie's confused because she studies the histories of the Teutons, and not once has she heard of a brother named Augustine, so she's very intrigued by the mystery. She also gets Augustine's attention. He comes over asking her to dance. She declines because the rumors that she's heard about him, but eventually gives in and the two do an elemental dance together. His is fire, hers is ice. Swanie is shooketh. She wants to know more about the mysterious man that makes her heart go ba-bump, ba-bump, ba-bump in the night. While at the castle, she sneaks around to find the archives. At least, I think it was the castle. If not, it was something like that. I'm not entirely sure where the archives were. She's sneaking around to find those archives because she wants to look for Augustine's birth certificate to make sure that he is telling the truth, because she has never seen his name in the history books and she has never heard of a brother to Prince Otto. In the archives, she runs into Augustine because he is the one who keeps track of the records, writes the records, and, kills people during the day. He shows her his birth certificate, and Swanie's like, wow, okay, so you weren't lying, but now I just have more questions, like, why aren't you mentioned anywhere in history? From here, there's a lot of meandering around in the plot, talking about random things to pass the time, what is life going to be like in 1044, and how Swanie feels bad that she got her cousin killed, even though her cousin isn't actually dead. Multiple times, she says how she'll never forgive herself, but, dude, the way that this is written, it's like being upset forever because your sibling died while playing Mario Brothers. She's not gone. She's waiting for you back in the year 2000, bro. As Swanie goes on with her life, one day, Augustine shows up at the house she's living at and asks her to come with him. Against Freya's warnings, Swanie goes with him to see what he wants. When asked why Swanie would disregard the warnings of her friend and the gossip about him, Swanie responds, I'm not like other girls. In true bad boy fashion, I know that was supposed to be a wink. In true bad boy fashion, Augustine goes, well, by doing that, you're going to get yourself killed. Other wink. I can't wink my right eye. I'm sorry, I just can't. To which Swanie says, I could die. I don't really care. Augustine starts asking questions about why Swanie was looking for his records, then shares how impressed, curious, and suspicious he is because she can read and write, and he's never met a girl like that before. He questions her strange accent and discovers that she learned the language that they're speaking from a book. The two agree to mentor each other over different languages that they know. I'm not entirely sure why, because I know that Swanie wants information from Augustine, so that makes sense, but Augustine doesn't need anything from Swanie. He tries to get her to trade sex because he wants the sex, But being a good Christian girl, Swanie is waiting until marriage, so he agrees to learn some languages that don't exist instead. And even knowing that he'll never be able to use them because he lives in 1044, so what use does he have for modern English? In general, it just feels like something to give the characters something to do because we have to meander for 20 years in order to get to the actual plot, and Swanie doesn't have any kind of goal whatsoever in this book. So enter into some montaging and summary of months passing by to develop the relationship between the two through we studied together without actually showing them interacting all of this time. And while that is happening, she's getting really, really, really into Augustine by just hanging out with him. Joel's getting jealous of the time that Swanie is spending with Augustine because Joel is theoretically falling in love with Swanie as well. A little bit of a Stockholm syndrome going on here, if you ask me, because Swanie is the only bit of familiarity he has in this weird place where nobody speaks his language and he doesn't know anybody. Swanie berates Joel for being jealous by also saying, unlike you, I have to find things to occupy my mind with, okay? So just stop being mad that I'm hanging out with Augustine. I am going to pause here to say, is this her dissing him for being a metal worker? Because he has a job working with metal, like building things. He is a tradesman. And she doesn't have a job, and she's not contributing to society in any way. So how can she smack talk him for working hard? So is this supposed to be her smack talking him for working hard while she is supposedly smarter than him, an academic? So of course she's talking to the dark priest of magic and sex. Of course she has to keep her mind busy. She is so much better than a metal worker, you know? Is that how I'm supposed to take this? Because that's how it came off, and I don't know if that was the intention for this character, but it was rude. After Joel is talked to like this, I don't really understand why he doesn't just straight up murder himself at this point. For most of the book, if not the entirety of the book, whenever Joel was mentioned, I was cheering for him to just go home, set himself free of the nightmare, and live his best life with his girlfriend, maybe dump his girlfriend because you really want Swanie as an in-law, but I digress. Swanie can take care of herself and she knows it. Going forward, Augustine shows up when Swanie and Joel are hanging out. Joel and Augustine talk about blood and guts, which makes Joel like Augustine more now, despite him being fearful about seeing the execution before, but okay, apparently now he's excited by it. They wander around the castle together until they come across an organ room. Now this is not innards, but an instrument. Augustine prompts Swanie to play, fitting her in somebody else's organ shoes, and she does play the organ without any problem whatsoever, doesn't miss a beat. It's perfect, as you do. They're interrupted when Prince Otto enters the scene and berates all of them for using the organ. Augustine, pissed off, calls Otto a murderer. Otto and Augustine fight each other, Swanie is shooed out, and Augustine tells her not to worry about him because they're brothers, and Otto can't do anything to him because they're brothers. Now, based on the relationship that Augustine and Otto have, I'm not sure why Augustine is just allowed back into the castle and to do what he wants at this point, but their relationship is never really explained or how he gets away with all of this stuff when Augustine is also a murderer and a rapist. Like, that should be enough to kind of get you kicked out of the royal family, probably, maybe, I don't know. But it's not. It is the Middle Ages, so maybe that's all fine and dandy, whatever, but that's also never really explained. Continuing through life, Oktoberfest comes around and Augustine cancels the language meetings he has with Swanie because he's got better things to do. In this case, it's rape and murder a woman in the woods. Swanie stumbles upon such things happening, flashbacks to her own rape in book 1, but still sticks around for Augustine to see her. He also eats the victim's heart after murdering her. Though Swanie is horrified, Augustine explains that the woman is a Saxon, so it's okay that he killed her, and Swanie's like, yeah, that checks out. Swanie eventually passes out after this. She wakes up in Augustine's house where he tells her that he wants to kill and rape her as well, but just not yet. He's not going to do anything to her yet. Once she is recovered from fainting, Augustine explains why he killed the woman in the woods and whether Augustine really would do the same thing to her. Augustine explains, look, I killed that woman because I don't give a shit about her, all right? You got that? Anyone who isn't a Teuton is pretty much a gutter rat and deserves to be just mashed all over the ground and abused and whatever. Who the fuck cares? I feasted on her memories and they were all shit. You know why? Because I'm a Teuton and she's not, and fuck you. That's pretty much it. And just so you know, Augustine also drinks blood when he kills people in order to absorb the memories connected to the blood of that victim. After explaining this, he continues, I'm not going to kill you, Swanie, at least not yet. You're not like other women because you're interesting to me. But I promise I'll let you know when I'm ready to kill you, and you'll know in the future, all right? Do you trust me? Sound good? Deal. I'm not even joking. This is literally what the text says. Yeah. So Swanie asks Augustine if it's her high blood purity that makes her so enticing to him, and Augustine laughs because though Swanie is 95% blood pure, he's a 99%er, and so 95, you gotta get those numbers up, champ. Those be rookie numbers, brah. Swanie panics when Augustine reaches for her, but he pulls her into him and says, don't worry, you're safe. Nobody's going to hurt you. Literally 2 pages after Augustine said that he's going to kill her someday. At some point, Swanie passes out, and when she wakes up, she learns that Augustine took care of her while she was passed out. He then says, look, I might be a murderer, but I'm not the first murderer, all right? My brother was the first murderer when he killed our mother during his childbirth, okay? So I'm not to blame here. You can't hold me accountable. I didn't spill the blood first. It was that fucker over there coming out the birth canal. He's to blame. No malicious intent needed. Blame that guy. This is where we see the start of Augustine's mommy issues budding. And a possible Oedipus complex. I feel like the Oedipus complex is very obvious in this book, but we'll get there. After explaining all of this about his background and justifications to Swanie, he takes her back to town where he tells her, look, now that you've seen the real me, now that you know my criminal background, my enticements, all of this, will you look at me like every other woman in my life for the last 22 years and shun me and push me to the boundaries of society? Or will you see me in my imperfect, incomplete criminal self and accept me for who I am? I'll give you like 5 days to make a determination of if I'm worthy of your attention. See you later, Swan, princess. Swanie spends a couple of days stewing on what she's learned about Augustine, his rationale, and thinking about the hard life that she'd have if she married somebody that was not a Teuton and did not have the coveted golden blood. She didn't want to have mixed-race children, and she didn't want her babies to be discriminated against because they were mixed race. She goes back to Augustine after a few days and forgives him for every bad thing that he'd ever done, and even forgives him for threatening to rape and kill her just a couple of days ago. Augustine assures Swanie that he's not going to rape her because rape isn't necessary to have good sex with another Teuton. That's specifically saved for the non-Teuts. She only should fear being murdered because, well, that gets him off. What are the moral implications here? That Swanie is okay with being threatened with murder but not threatened with rape? I'm not entirely sure. The way this whole relationship is written is kind of bizarre, and honestly, I really want to encourage people to read this book, to come back to talk about it, because I need people to talk about this book with to figure this stuff out. So check out the link and purchase it yourself if you want to take a read and see what's going on. I think it's on sale right now. For the most part, I'm just like, what the actual feck? So here we are. Augustine's forgiven, and he's like, this is amazing. You're the first woman to treat me like this since my mother. How can I ever repay you? And Swanie asks to know everything about Augustine's mother. So he tells her everything. Everything. Except for maybe if they had sex. He doesn't share that. But this is where we really start to see the Oedipus complex mommy love situation. He also says how after his mother died, he was angry with God, so he rejected becoming the key holder and turned to Wotan, the demon blood guy, and didn't want to become the key holder of the Teutons, and so that is why Otto runs Munich and not him, the older brother, who rightly deserves it. Once the backstory is done with, Swanie asks Augustine to teach her how to use their magic to manipulate and control blood, because that is also a thing. Augustine agrees, but only in exchange for allowing him to drink her blood so that he may know her memories and everything that she knows. We have now entered the vampire mode. I don't know about anyone else who's read this, but this kind of felt like it came out of nowhere for me. So Augustine's now sucking on Swanie's blood until she practically dies. Then he does a blood transfusion by cutting open their hands and putting them together so that he can transfer his blood into Swanie, and then she doesn't die. Swanie is again shooketh as to why Augustine would bring her back from the dead if he had spoken so easily of killing her. It's not your time yet, is his excuse. Swanie asks Augustine, and she's already in love with him, well, why didn't you just let me die? And Augustine goes, well, I couldn't follow you into death, so I had to pull you back. Augustine asks if Swanie is scared of him, and Swanie goes, you look like you want to kiss me. You want to kiss me, you gorgeous rapist man? That was a two-eyed wink. And then Augustine says the most what the frick line that is, I think, in this book. I think I was laughing for 3 or 4 minutes when I read this. He says, in spite of what you've seen, my darling, I am well versed in the methods of seduction. Even I, Augustine von Baron, the rapist, can be kind to you. I was laughing for a while after that. At rapist being used here. Like, really, dude? Calling yourself a rapist is not a pickup line. I'm sorry, it's not. Anyway, they kiss, they make out. Apparently that doesn't turn Swanie off at all. And, but they don't bang, because Swanie says they need to stop. And despite Augustine being a self-admitted rapist, he respects Swanie enough to say, okay, if you're waiting until marriage, I will not force you. I will not even coerce you. I will not even try to convince you at all. And Swanie is like, bruh, I'm so in love with this guy. So in love. So this is about halfway through the book. Swanie is then telling Freya about her love for Augustine despite his crimes, her falling harder for Augustine, then exchanging blood for memories, while Joel is theoretically falling more in love with Swanie, and Swanie is holding on to her virginity while seeing Augustine. And at one point, Swanie and Augustine do something called a heart binding ritual. That is typical and traditional of the Teuton priests. This is supposed to make their connection stronger, but it also forces the women in the relationships to become subservient to the man totally, to the point that the woman, via magic, must refer to the heart-bound man as master, that he can control her will, all of these things. Swanie agrees to the ritual because it gives Augustine the ability to feel her and be with her completely at all times. It also influences the blood drinking because Augustine will feel it if he's oversampling from Swanie. But after she agrees to the ritual, she hands over her free will to Augustine, and Augustine asks her if she wants to have sex. No time wasted. She's like, he's like, you're mine. So, let's do it, right? You want to do it now? You want to do it? Swanie is like, no, not really. Like, I already told you I'm waiting until marriage. Even if this thing for binding is more serious than matrimony. But Augustine, using his new powers of control on Swanie, is like, yeah, I think you're going to change your mind. He's getting angry and using his hand on her heart to twist her to his will while she's mentally saying no, 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 and yes, yes, yes at the same time. Not only because she wants to have sex with Augustine for love, but it'll also raise her blood purity for magic purposes, because in this world, Teuton blood, you improve your blood purity by having sex with other Teutons. That's how it works. Though Swanie wants everything that's happening, she doesn't want it outside of marriage. Augustine only sort of cares, but not enough to not manipulate Swanie using his magic to grip her into compliance. Fortunately, Swanie's purity is saved by someone knocking on the door in the middle of the night. Apparently, Augustine doesn't only daylight as the executioner, he also nightlights as delivering children that are on the doorstep of the devil. By that, I mean like fatal childbirth. He is called on for fatal childbirth deliveries. He leaves Swanie to go and help deliver this random baby, which, spoiler alert, both the mother and the child die. It was too late for either of them to be saved. Swanie, thinking her main issue with almost getting raped just then was that she mentioned something that turned Augustine on. She was like, you wanted to kiss me. And so next time she's with him, she just won't mention anything that's even like remotely sexy or flirty, and that should stop rape from coming up like at all. Because it was just her prompting that made him want to. Despite the events that transpired and the new control Augustine has on Swanie, she still meets him as normal for their language meetings and goes with him to a private location. Don't worry though, no rape happens. He doesn't even try. Then we move things along with singing Christmas songs with Joel, and Swanie reflects on everything that's happened and how hard she is falling for Augustine and everything that Augustine means to her as her new master. She also reflects on how Joel keeps talking about marrying her and how much she doesn't want Joel in that way. She wants Augustine, but she'll never in a million years tell Joel that she doesn't love him. Again, I'm going to just drop the reminder here. Joel is her cousin's boyfriend. This is going to be awkward when they go back to, current year and she married him and he has real feelings and she doesn't. Like, this is going to be really weird. After Christmas, Augustine shows Swanie his mother's memorial / this chapel that he's got, and they bond more over the love that he has for his mother and how Swanie cares about him. The general vibe for the rest of this book is that Swanie loves Augustine and keeps leading Joel on. Joel, after a year and a half in 1044, is clinging to Swanie as the only familiar thing to him and plans to marry her, but he knows that their different race will be an issue in that marriage and in society and will stop Swanie from having her higher position in the community. So instead of him marrying her as a normal human, he's signed up for this thing called a blood transfer, where you rip the organs out of a human and a Teuton, mash them together, and magically tie them back together and make a Teuton out of the human. A lot of people die. Most people die. A minority of the transfers actually work. But you won't be surprised to find that 2 out of 2 blood transfers that happen in this book, everybody survives them. Swanie spends a little less than 10 chapters maybe worrying about whether Joel is going to die or how she can't let him die during the blood transfer or she'll hate herself for it. He's only doing the blood transfer to marry her properly, yet instead of just telling Joel, hey, I'm not really that into you in that kind of way and it would be kind of weird since you're dating my cousin, she just tries to gross him out and scare him with the dangers of the blood transfer. And obviously that doesn't really work because the blood transfer still goes through and she doesn't tell him that she's not into him. All the while this is happening, Augustine proposes that they steal the time travel song from Paulus, who is like a confidant for Prince Otto, and then they just skip town out of this era and go to Swanie's timeline together. Swanie's like, I mean, we could do that, sure, but then, like, what do we do with Joel? And Augustine is like, we just take Joel back to his own timeline and or kill him and send him there on his own. It's not brain surgery, Swanie. I should also add that Swanie, when panicking about the blood transfer and Joel marrying her when she doesn't want to marry him, Augustine brought up just killing Joel and sending him back to his time zone and his girlfriend where he can be happy, and Swanie is like, no, we can't do that because I would feel bad. How does she not realize, how does she not feel bad keeping him captive in this place where he's got nothing, he knows nobody, he has no family, his girlfriend is gone, she's ditching him all the time, she doesn't even like him, it looks like, and he's a second-class citizen. How does she not feel bad about keeping him captive there? But she feels bad about killing him to send him back to where he's actually got a life established? I don't understand any of this. And this is probably what drove me the most crazy with this book. If she was worried about causing Joel pain specifically or him knowing that she killed him, both she and Augustine have blood magic where they can stop the flow of blood inside of somebody's body. So they could have just stopped his heart while he was asleep and he would have been none the wiser and woke up back in his time zone. So I don't really understand how any of this works other than this was where the author needed the plot to go. So the day of the blood transfer comes and Joel is going to die. Augustine uses the blood magic to keep Joel from dying, which then pisses off Prince Otto because blood magic is a crime, unlike murder and rape. Prince Otto is like, yeah, we are Christian people, and blood magic deals with the demon of death, and so you're not supposed to be using it. Apparently we have found the line of debauchery that gets you kicked out of the club. So Augustine's name will now be removed from history, but he will also be kept around to archive the life and times of the Teutons, because total exile is not an option, apparently. Looking at this situation, I'm not entirely sure how the magic works either, because the book also explained that the Teuton blood is related to the Wutan, who is the death demon, I'm pretty sure. I could be wrong about that, so I'm open to being wrong. But that's the implication that I got. So Prince Otto is going to punish Augustine for turning away from God and using blood magic, but their blood magic comes from the demon of death anyway. I have to have something wrong here. Swanie now learns that the archivist Wolfgang, whose writing she read all about in her time, was actually Augustine all along. He just changed his name to Wolfgang after he was exiled and erased as Augustine. Also, because this feels relevant, One of the first things that Swanie thinks about after Joel's blood transfer is finished is she's wondering if his blood purity is higher than hers because, #priorities. While Joel and Freya recover from the near-death experience that they just had with the blood transfer, Swanie is throwing herself at Augustine because in addition to his banishment from history, the punishment is also that he must break the heart bond that he has with Swanie. Swanie is like, if this is how it ends, then I want to have sex with you, like, right freaking now so that I can feel that bond that we have with the heart thing, with also the sex. So they go back to Augustine's place and do the do. Again, priorities. After finishing the sex, Swanie's thinking about how when she and Joel are married, she'll always be thinking of her perfect and amazing violent sex with Augustine. And for the record, Swanie does describe it as both perfect and violent, so it sounds like more kink. Just putting that out there. Despite their love, despite their attachment, despite their plan to take the time song from Paulus and just run for it, and despite Augustine's penchant toward criminality, they behave and go right to the hearing as required of them so that their heart bond can be broken. Augustine can sign the contract of his banishment and he can finish paying his dues. All of it goes down without a hitch. Swanie calls out Augustine's name once it's all over, and then she gets yelled at by Otto for speaking a name that shall not be spoken. That man doesn't exist anymore. The end. That is where book 2 ends. So, there we are. I know, we are flying. I appreciate you going through all of this with me. So, now I'm going to tell you my response to the book. I left a lot of stuff out of that because I really wanted to get through the story and get to the comments. So again, if you want more context for any of what I just shared, I highly recommend that you read this book. You don't need to read the first one to really understand what's going on here, other than maybe more placement with the Wutan. And I feel like that's pretty much it. I'll let you know when I read the first book and do the review on the first book. And the reason I'm doing the second book review before the first book review is I read the second book. I just finished reading the second book this week, haven't read the first book, and I wanted to do a review while it was still fresh in my mind so that I could talk about it a little more accurately than when it's gone. So, to start, the prologue. The prologue takes the teeth out of the entire piece by removing any sense of stakes. We know that Swanie's alive at the end of the book, so anytime she says, I could die, I'm going to die, this will kill me, it's pointless. There's no tension throughout the entire book, and the threat of death is not there. In two ways. She doesn't die in any meaningful manner because she's in post of the story, writing the story down, and even if we removed the prologue, there's no threat to her life in the center of the book at all, because if she's in the past, she just gets a Ready Player One restart. So using the threat of death as a type of tension or threat in the story really doesn't work. The prologue in both books is also just kind of used to fawn over Swanie and tell you how great that she is. I'm not a super big fan of prologues, though I don't have anything against them if you do them well. They're just like really easy to mess up, and they set the tone for the entire book. So the prologue in this book really didn't feel particularly effective for me. And then there's finally no chemistry between Augustine and Swanie in the beginning of either prologues in either books. But if they've got like this hot, sexy passion that's in book 2, and I don't know if it's going to be in book 3, we'll wait and see in book 3, but if they have this passion that is theoretically powering their emotions in book 2, and maybe they're more mature in the prologues because they've been together, they should have some kind of chemistry. But instead they come off more like a student and a teacher, with some mild hostility and Swanie's petulance. Swanie really doesn't do herself any favors to humble herself to the reader when she's talking in either of the prologues, because she acts like she knows better than everybody else. And hey, maybe she does. And like Empress Teresa says, I can drop dead. So take that as you will. So character-wise, Joel is the real MVP of this story. He was brought back in time with no preface or information, and he just rolled with all of the punches that were thrown at him. He still protected Swanie when she was in trouble, tried to learn the new language of the time, got a job, wanted to accommodate Swanie as best he could, and generally just had a good attitude. He didn't want to leave Swanie alone in the past, all by herself, so he stayed with her instead of going home to his girlfriend. He also He was also continuously treated like garbage, talked down to, and even insulted by Swanie, but he kept by her side. Honestly, I think this book would have been better off and actually made Swanie look better if Joel had heard that his girlfriend died and then just ran straight into battle so that he could also die and then go and join his girlfriend back home. Swanie's image would have improved 500% by the lack of insults at poor Joel that would not have been there anymore. So that's just a poor, sad, missed opportunity on that one. One final character note is that if you watch a lot of this channel, especially when I talk about books, one of the things that I really, really require from a book, other than character logic where decisions make sense and choices make sense, is that there are consequences for actions. And that is how you actually complicate a plot and you add tension. Is somebody makes an action, probably not a good action, something bad happens, and maybe that annoys some people. It does not annoy me. I need to see consequences to actions. So with this book, Swanie is a single woman in 1044, wandering around with the town executioner, pervert, rapist, murderer, guy who is pretty much defamed by his royal family. He does blood magic. Everybody is like, stay away from this guy. She's running off with him alone all the time, spending long hours alone, but she's not socially outcasted. Nobody gives her a hard time. Not even Joel gives her a hard time. And then you've got the whole situation with Joel, where Swanie doesn't tell him that she's basically cheating on him. They're not married yet, but she's basically cheating on him. Emotionally, at the end sexually, because she's still leading him on and they're apparently engaged, and she never comes clean. She and Joel never actually fight, where Joel had a problem with Augustine initially, and then I think at some other point the problem with Augustine comes back, but Joel never really confronts her about, hey dude, you need to be careful. You're around this dangerous guy. Do you know what the people in town are talking about you? Like, if you had actually had Swanie and Joel kind of go after each other, but it's Joel going, hey, you need to be careful, and Swanie going, mind your own business, I know what I'm doing, and actually had them fight and then make up, have some kind of consequences, put them in some kind of unfortunate situation or miserable situation that is not planned by the author, like the rape that didn't happen, there would be more tension, more consequences, more tension, and more at stake, because now she's actually risking losing her friends. But there are zero consequences in any of this, and Swanie is protected from literally anything bad happening to her that the author doesn't specifically want to use to bolster Swanie's victimhood status. She's not ostracized. She's in any way for her obviously inappropriate actions or the way that she treats herself or the way that she talks. Social stigma, just some kind of consequences. There are no consequences for Swanie, so that kind of leads it to a more deflated tension, deflated plot, deflated stakes. Also, the lack of consequences usually makes the character feel more like a Mary Sue because she's being protected from actual bad things happening to her. For narration and description, I have two main problems in this book: diction choices and telling. The diction in general, it was kind of bizarre, especially for a first-person narrator who was an 18-year-old from the year 2000. It felt more like the character was trying to be Jane Austen in a way that she talks, and it was hard to imagine her as an actual person, particularly an actual person from 2000. It would have been interesting to see more of the dynamic between, common era speaking and then speaking in 2044, and Swanie having to adjust how she speaks in order to say things that make sense at that time period. But you don't have any of that clash of communication. That would have added depth, and it would have been a very interesting way to show the culture shock and how different things were said, or using metaphors or using slang that doesn't exist. And that language is such an interesting thing to play with. And the dynamic of 2000 versus a 1044 was never showed at all in this book. It just made Swanie feel unbelievable. This isn't the strangest example, but it's an easy to find one. Quote, when I expelled a rather potent batch of urine. This doesn't sound like an 18-year-old girl from 2000's New Jersey. Please, I just have to ask why. Why was this the choice for the stylization of her language? The whole book is written with these bizarre language choices that attempt to make the book read elevated, but instead it's confusing and the characterizations aren't there and the characters don't read authentic. This is a YA fantasy book with some romance in it, and it's attempting to paint itself as something else using the language. That's not an insult to YA fantasy. I'm more wondering why you would avoid the title when YA fantasy is insanely popular, and this would really fit just right in if you made Swanie a little more relatable. The other thing that bothered me here with the narration was all of the telling. We'd skipped over conversations, interactions, months of time, so much time that could have been used to build relationships and bring characters alive. But instead of having characters interact and do things together, we were told that they did things together. This made the book feel more like an outline than an actual story, and more often than not, it came off like the author wasn't enjoying writing her own story. Instead, she saw the character interactions outside of the interactions with Augustine to be busy work, to be gotten over with so that we can actually get to the good stuff. The author didn't feel invested in her own work. She felt bored by her own work, and in turn, it left me feeling bored and unattached, detached from everybody except for poor Joel. Why write this at all if it's so boring that you're literally skipping over it as fast as you can? Now, I can't say that that was the intention or that's how the author felt on any of this, but that's the interpretation, that's the intention that came through with the way that it was written. I mentioned this somewhere, I can't remember at this point, that the toothlessness of the plot, the time-traveling rules killed all of the tension that this story would have had the ability to have. The toothlessness of the plot immediately makes itself obvious when Beth dies and Swanie is sobbing over the death of her cousin and blaming herself for it like Beth is gone forever. The reader doesn't have that investment in Beth's death because we already know that Beth isn't dead, and we know that Swanie knows that Beth isn't actually dead. So her response comes off as overdramatic. Continuously throughout the story, Swanie pretends that she and Joel are trapped in the year 1044 because she doesn't have the stone. But the obvious answer, if you're bored or tired or don't want to be there, is just kill yourself if you want to go back home. This becomes one of the biggest things that hurts Swanie as a consistent character to actually want to be around. I mean, Swanie has a lot of problems, and believe me, I love my broken person stories. But Swanie she is just a bad person with no redeeming qualities. One of the biggest casualties of the time travel rules here is that the deaths don't matter. Swanie constantly goes on about how she's to blame for Beth's death and how bad she feels, or how she just can't let Joel die when dying is literally the merciful option here. She talks about how childbirth is dangerous for Teuton women, and then adding the medical conditions of 1044, giving birth would be even more dangerous for her. But this just has me thinking that if time travel means that when you die, you don't die for real, then isn't it kind of the best loophole for Teutons to travel back in time to give birth so that if they die during childbirth, they just go back to normal time, and then either the baby comes with them, like the dissipating backpack that Beth took with her when she died, or you just get sent back to your time zone and you get back in the time travel, go back and collect your infant, and then you go forward in time again. Like, having babies in the past is the fail-safe if you can't actually die. So her complaining about, well, I can't do that because I could die. Yeah, but you're not really dead. You can just come right back. So with that said, pretty much every time Swanie brings up, but we could die, it's like, who cares? Because we know that, no, you're going to be fine. Oh my gosh. And in some cases, there were even times when I was just, oh my gosh, let this man die, please. Like, Swanie really hurt herself with Joel. Side tangent. Swanie went on about how she didn't love Joel, but was going to have to marry him just so that they could keep up their facade since they were both time travelers. But she was so in love with Augustine that she couldn't think of anything else but marrying Augustine. And so she brings this up to Augustine, just all of this drama and her desire to be with Augustine, but how she has to marry Joel. And Augustine is like, dude, in a moment of clarity and smartness, Augustine is like, dude, let's just kill Joel and send him back to his girlfriend. Like, what's the problem here? And Swanie's like, no. Because apparently she can live with herself, emotionally manipulating this guy, cheating on him, and ruining his future relationship with his girlfriend, her cousin, by possibly having a child with him for 20 years, but she cannot fathom just putting him out of his misery now so that he can go home. Really? Are you serious? It's reading this kind of conundrum where in the series I'm like, is Swanie supposed to be an asshole? Because she's an absolute asshole. Which takes me on to the next thing, particularly important in anything with romance, in my opinion. I'm not an avid romance reader, so this is just for me when it has to do anything with romance because of how I am with romance. There's no way to like Swanie because she is an enthusiastic cheater. Through a good portion of this book, Swanie is leading Joel on, while Joel's got nothing but devotion for Swanie to make sure that she's taken care of and happy and has the best life that she possibly can in this time travel zone. The length he goes for her is incredible because this includes a highly risky blood transfer ritual to make him a Teuton like her, because otherwise they would be looked down upon by society as a mixed race couple, and Swanie would lose stature as a Teuton woman. She also wouldn't receive this big business investment because somebody that she knows wants to give her his business. Very progressive in 1044, mind you, and he couldn't give it to her if she married somebody that was not a Teuton. And Joel knows this. So he's like, I will become a Teuton so you don't lose all of your opportunities. I don't care how risky it is. I'm going to do it for you because I want you to have the best life that you possibly can, Swanie. I don't want to hold you back. Yet Swanie can't help but think how often she's not in love with him. How often she just doesn't want to marry him, but she's going to have to. She's going to have to hold on to him, but she's going to also have to see Augustine behind Joel's back because there's no living without Augustine at this point. While Joel is willing to risk his life becoming Swanie's equal in society, Swanie's thinking about how she's going to marry Joel but never love him, and she's going to continue to see Augustine while Joel is super in love with her. This looks so much like a forced love triangle, but that's beside the point. Swanie repeats how she can't have sex with Augustine all this time because she's a good Christian girl that doesn't have sex outside of marriage. However, she's apparently okay with adultery and having sex with somebody outside of marriage, just so long as she's married first. This fits into those good Christian morals that stops her from premarital sex. There's not a moment where she questions her morals or her judgment or her cheating on Joel or her leading him on. She never looks at what she might be doing to him. The fact that if she and Joel had a relationship and children for 20 years in the past, that there would be no him going back to date Beth when you go forward in time again, because he's already fathered Swanie's children. He's already probably fallen in love with her for real or has some sort of Stockholm Syndrome version of it. It doesn't matter if he's 18 again in the year 2000. He's lived 2 decades married to Swanie, being Swanie's husband and father to her children. None of this comes up, and Swanie has no reflection on whatever is going on in other people's lives. It's all about her fancies, getting her rocks off, what her lusting needs are with that dark rapist priest, which she does seem to fetishize, his being a rapist, that is. I'm not here to kink shame Swanie. If that's what you're into, all right, but you're not convincing me that Augustine's a good man and that you're overlooking his crimes when you're using a rapist like a pet name and you're flirting in admiration of his gorgeous face. You get me? Now, I doctored the plot. By that I mean, I was talking to the buddies that I was reading this with, and we were going over different options that this book could have taken and how to actually give this book a plot, because a lot of it is meandering with Swanie just moving from opportunity to waste time for 20 years until the fall of Teuton. And this is what I would have recommended to give the novel direction, to give it girth, and I would actually be interested in reading this version of the novel. The book starts out with Swanie going back in time to see the fall of her people, Beth and Joel included. Beth dies. Joel, defending her honor, dies shortly thereafter, leaving Swanie alone behind. Swanie escapes the attackers and loses the stone that brought her there. And, okay, she could go forward in time by just dying again, she could go forward in time by just killing herself, but without the stone, she'd lose her ability to explore the past, and she'd have to explain it to her mentor in the current year that she kind of abused his trust and uses the stone and lost it. So she knows that Prince Otto is around here somewhere, and he's the guy who discovered the time magic via the time travel song. So if she can learn that song, then she doesn't necessarily need the rock, so she sets out to find Prince Otto to solve this problem. She eventually does get into Munich, and her new goal is to befriend Otto and gain his trust so that he'll teach her the time travel song. While building this relationship with Prince Otto, she meets Augustine and sees the tension between the two brothers. There could have been some time between her meeting Augustine for the first time and learning that they were brothers, just that she could note the tension between them, and you should be able to see that relationship there. Meanwhile, Augustine hates Otto because Otto received the keys for Munich over him. Augustine could have wanted absolute power, but the keeper of the keys saw the darkness in his heart and wouldn't give him the keys. instead giving them to Otto. Augustine said, fine, if I can't be the king, then I'll be your bastard. And so he started his descent into darkness. This will come back up when Swanie shows up showing interest in Otto, even if it's fake interest because she wants that song. Augustine sees the chance to take something from his brother in the same way that the keys were stolen from him. Augustine abducts Swanie and does that heart bond spell thing to make Swanie his. He then taunts his brother with his ownership of Swanie. This could have led to Swanie's over-empathy with Augustine despite his crimes, and over time come to have real feelings for him or because of the magical bond. It doesn't make Augustine a better person, but over time he could have fallen for Swanie despite this starting out as a thing to hurt Otto. While he's got Swanie in his grasp, he could also obviously drink her blood or do whatever you needed to do with that so that he could see the time travel opportunity and decide that he wants to flee out of this hell where he's got no power. Swanie is released because Augustine trusts that she's loyal with the heart bond. The plan is for Swanie to get the song from Otto so that they can escape, but in returning to Otto, she learns that Paulus also knows the song, and Paulus is a way weaker target. Augustine's new plan is to torture the song out of Paulus so that he and Swanie can flee the Middle Ages. Prince Otto then becomes aware of this plot, and this becomes the crime which Augustine is actually charged for at the end of the book. Swanie's cut loose of the responsibilities of the crime because of her heart-binding loyalty to Augustine. She's seen as his victim, basically. And she kind of likes him now, though how influenced that is by the heart-binding thing, we can't really be sure yet. Otto breaks the heart-binding spell. This breaks Swanie because she does actually have something that developed in her from having that connection with Augustine. But Otto, caring for Swanie, comes to her aid and banishes Augustine from the area. Here, Swanie's got the choices of remaining with Otto or leaving with Augustine in exile. This could be the end of Book 2. This would have given the story drive, purpose, and Swanie would have had a goal rather than wasting away a year and a half meandering with nothing to do, and the love triangle would have been much more believable than that with Joel, which is so forced that he just ends up being a punching bag for Swanie. Again, it would have made Swanie way more empathetic because, one, she would have actually looked like a victim. Two, she actually would have empathized. And three, she wouldn't have been a dick to Joel. Imagine the tension and the drama of the brothers fighting for power and love. Joel was probably the worst thing that this story could have kept around because everything Swanie did to him or thought about him just made her look like a really bad person. This could have been kingdom, power, love, darkness, and crime without the cheating. It would have made Swanie sympathetic instead of making her a heartless abuser who couldn't even tell Joel, bro, we're just friends, knock it off. That, and almost every time she references Joel, she's disparaging, insulting, mean. The book starts off with her calling him an idiot because he didn't know what she knows when she didn't tell him what they were doing. This trend just continues throughout the book. She also judges him for not being a Teuton. Like, you see the phrase specifically, quote, at least he wanted to act like a gentleman despite his lack of Teuton blood, end quote. This line kind of implies that Swanie thinks Teutons are superior to anyone else, and everyone else is more likely to be evil or bad than a Teuton. There is a lot of blood purity superiority in this book, and the majority of it comes from Swanie. I'm not saying that you can't do that or that it offends me or anything, but it doesn't make Swanie look good. I saw more of this superiority from Swanie. And again, I would care less if there was actually something interesting about her, but she was just kind of a bitch. Anyway, I can't take full credit for the plot line that I just gave to you because I talked about alternative storylines or ideas with my reading buddies for this book, and ultimately, this is the shape that it came out to, so cheers to the reading buddies. The last thing I want to talk about in this book is the kinkifying of criminality. I know that's a funny way of saying it, right? I just wanted to bring this up because I do. Not kink shaming, but I did want to very specifically point out the flavor of this book. Not only is Augustine a rapist, but the rapist thing is kind of used as a flirty tool, a pet name, a kink. Swanie doesn't just think of Augustine the rapist as a criminal to be forgiven, but my rapist priest, my gorgeous heathen lover with the prettiest face and the giant cock. And it kinkifies his crimes as part of his identity. It comes off that she thinks it's kind of hot that he's okay with raping other women, but she's respectable enough that he doesn't rape her. So there's that. Then there's also the Oedipus complex thing going on in here, and I'm curious if that was meant to be in there by the author, because that is, in the first book, Swanie is in love with Hans. her 30-year senior mentor and her father's employee. Romantic and lusty love is what we're talking about here. In the same sentence that she's talking about her love for Hans, she relates it to the love Augustine had for his mother, saying, he is replacing Hans for me, and I'm replacing his mother for him. So, in very, very, very clear terms, she says that Augustine was in love with his mother. There's more than one reference in here that hints that Augustine was in love with his mother, and his craze and criminality came because he loved her, then his younger brother killed her during childbirth. So I'm mostly just curious if this was a subliminal implant or if this was meant to be in there because Augustine is this messed up. And I mean, you do you. You tell your depraved story however you got to tell it, but I also just want to know and have a hint if something is supposed to be depraved or kinky. This book also holds what feels like a lot of kink related to the author, and it felt a little more personal because it didn't read like part of the story, it read like something outside of the story. So that's all I'm going to say on that. If you're uncomfortable at the thought of the main love interest not only being a rapist, but also raping a child, and the MC saying that it's okay and dismissing the rapes because, one, she isn't personally raped by the bad guy, and two, the rape she witnesses her love interest commit is by a woman of a different race, so it doesn't matter, then this might not be the book for you. But in closing, those are my thoughts. I'm always disappointed when I read a book and I can see the potential of different ways that it could have gone and it just never got there. But what do I know? I'm just a... But I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Have you read this book? Will you read this book? What did you think of any or all of the elements that stuck out to you? And again, I encourage you to read it for yourself and make your own opinions and maybe come back and have a discussion if you feel so inclined. This is a great book to read with your friends in order to have the discussions about the contents of the book. So with all that said, thank you so much for watching. I look forward to the comments and have a great Monday. Don't die.
The only people who should come are those who want to meet their monsters.
If this is what Agatha wants, I don't know how we can even dispute it.
I change lives, baby.
And I end them. Sweetheart, no bargains hold. Only fools know restraint.
Only losers lose!
I've been under the knife so many times, I'm practically immune to it.
If your scissors are dull, may I recommend sharpening them with leather?
I think I hit you.
Bimal says I must have a guardian angel.
To enter the ring but abstain from playing is suicidal. Your virtue makes you nothing but a liability.
You're gonna die. You're gonna die. You're gonna die.